234, Chapter 13 of Dracula. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 234, Arrived Audibly. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by Knit Circus, the online magazine featuring 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can find out more by visiting www.knitcircus.com. Also, Cool for Cats, the new novel by Andrew C. Ordover. You can get it at amazon.com or find out more from the link in the show notes. And the big happy news I've been waiting to share with you. This week's show is brought to you by Audible. Please visit audiblepodcast.com/craftlit for your free audiobook download. More on that in a moment. But first, I wanted to remind you about our December incentive. Julie Tomaseva in the UK has graciously offered to put up 2 gorgeous patterns, a hat and mitten set. You can see pictures of them on the show notes at craftlit.com. If you donate to CraftLit during the month of December with a little Merry Christmas greeting, you don't actually have to write a greeting, and let me know your address if you would like to have a What Would Madame Defarge Knit bracelet sent to you. Please do that. There is a button on the craftlit.com website that will take you to PayPal to make it all easy and reasonably painless for you and put you into the drawing for the knitting patterns. Well, a lot has been happening at CraftLit, as you might imagine, with the Audible news. I do want to get some housekeeping out of the way first before we start talking about books in general. And the first and most important piece of news is that the penguin sweater thing isn't exactly true this time around. There was a previous event, tragedy, when penguins needed sweaters. That is not the case right now. I thought, checked, but I, in fact, was looking at the wrong piece of information for this current disaster. So don't knit any more penguin sweaters. They will still go to good use if you've already done it, but don't knit any more of them. Amy, our listener and friend in New Zealand, has been behind in a few podcasts, and so when she caught up, she went, and emailed me right away. So that was a piece of information for you. I also got an email from Andrea in the San Diego area, and she says the following. I've been hosting lots of jewelry parties these last 2 months, and for the month of December, I wanted to give back to my community. My kids and I this year will be donating all of my profits to the Toys for Tots program and collecting blankets for the homeless as well. My website, and then she has her website, which I will put into the show notes for you. She said, if you could do a mention on the podcast, I would much appreciate it. If a listener/follower is in the San Diego area and doesn't want to make a purchase, I could schedule a donation pickup from those people as well. My kids will go down to downtown San Diego with me to deliver blankets and goodies to the homeless. And she hopes that this email finds you all in good health and happiness. So if you are in the greater San Diego area, or if you want to visit Andrea's website and look at the jewelry that she has available so that your purchase can go directly to Toys for Tots and Blankets for the Homeless, please do visit that site. I know you would probably think, California, what do they need blankets for in Southern California? If you don't live there, you don't know. San Diego and coastal points north of there, like La Jolla in that area, it actually gets very cloudy and foggy and quite cool. San Diego has a really remarkably temperate and coolish environment most of the time. Their climate is kind of odd, so it actually does get quite cold there at night, and the homeless could definitely use a blanket or two this time of year. So thank you, Andrea, for letting us know about that. And what a great idea. That's really lovely of you. Once again, just proving CraftLit people better. Another happy piece of information for you. Hunter Hammerson, who you may know from, way long ago, she provided the colophon pattern for CraftLit for one of our monthly events. She then went off like a crazy person and wrote Silk Road Socks, which is a gorgeous sock knitting book, and then provided the Cthulhu sock pattern for What Would Madame Defarge Knit Volume 1. She is providing another pattern for What Would Madame Defarge Knit Volume 2. But in the meantime, while she's doing like her PhD dissertation, because the woman never sleeps, she has written another book. It is called The Knitter's Curiosity Cabinet. And if you use that all as one word and put a .com after it, you'll get to the website for the new book. It is in pre-orders right now. It is selling great guns. It is going to be gorgeous. And congratulations, Hunter, friend of the show and friend, period. I'm so excited. I got to see a little bit of the book in advance, and I love her idea behind this book, and I really think you will too. So go check out the website, and when you do purchase a copy of the book, please let Hunter know that you heard about it here, and that will make her feel all warm and fuzzy inside, which makes me happy too. Now, a couple of online things to share with you. My husband just sent me the funniest, I'm not kidding, the funniest video called Just Glue Some Gears on It, and then in parentheses, and call it steampunk. Now, if you are one of the people who has been baffled by this term steampunk, I highly recommend you go and watch this video. It's very funny, goes very quickly. You'll probably need to listen to it twice, but it is engaging and charming and right up our little Victorian alley here with Dracula. And it does a nice job of explaining steampunk, what steampunk is and what steampunk isn't, and what it simply should not be, which is what makes it so funny. So that was very amusing, and I thought you would like that. Then I found a new gluten-free magazine called Easy Eats. I found it online. It hasn't been out long. If you have an iPad or any kind of a tablet reader, I think you can actually read this puppy on your tablet, which makes it very portable. And I find that tablet-wise, I am using that sucker in the kitchen all the time. And it's just so much easier to store everything in one place. It's kind of my go-to device. And I love that thing. Oh my gosh. So Easy Eats new gluten-free magazine that has, no kidding, a challah recipe. A real one that you can braid. So not for nothing worth getting a subscription. Oh, plea for help. If anyone has a hat block that's roughly around the 22-inch circumference mark, and you are interested in selling it or getting rid of it or tossing it in the garbage, talk to me first and let me know. I would much rather have my money going to someone from the podcast than to some unknown person on eBay who is going to make a fortune. Rather you make the fortune than them, is what I'm saying. So that is the other thing. Longtime listener and friend of the show, Renee, sent in an American Public Media link, Krista Tippett on Being, and the episode is called, this is from December 1st, 2011, is called Monsters We Love, TV's Pop Culture Theodicy. And the subtitle here, let me read it to you. Amoral zombies, loving vampires, righteous serial killers, and lots of God. That's all in the new TV season, a place where great writers and actors are telling the story of our time, playfully, violently, and soulfully. Interesting. The timing on all of this could not be better. Since we started the Zeitgeist, it's good to see other people jump on board our bandwagon. And along with that bandwagon, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on Audible. Many of you over the years have commented that Audible and CraftLit really are kindred spirits in our mission to get great literature out and into the ears of a busy populace. And that is certainly true. However, it's more than that, because Audible now, by supporting our show, is telling you, via me, that if you go to their website, audiblepodcast.com/craftlit, you can download a free audiobook and start a 14-day trial right now as you listen. And I can tell you, I have been a member of Audible for eons, well, since 2008. And as you know, I listen to books on LibriVox, but you can also get free books through Audible. You may not have known that. You may have thought that you have to buy something every time you go there, and that is not true. There are always freebies, but it is also true that often you get what you pay for, and the audio narrators that Audible has, including my friend Scott Brick from college, they are superior. And as you probably know, having listened to me for some time now, I never cook as happily as I cook with a book in my ear. And so I thought I would share a couple of things that I found on Audible this week. Now, I personally am still finishing the Ernest Hemingway Movable Feast, which I told you about a few episodes back, where it's actually been revised by Hemingway's son and grandson. And so that is a load of fun. Plus, the guy who's reading it is just awesome and sounds dead on like what you'd expect Hemingway to sound like, kind of like the actor in Midnight in Paris. But then I thought, I should check and see what's on Audible right now that has to do with vampires. And here's what I found. If you're doing nothing more than looking at vampire fiction, there are fully 71 pieces of vampire fiction, Sookie Stackhouse Plus, on Audible, just waiting for you. There's a history. There's 10 vampire classics. There are 2 vampire memoirs. I'm not entirely sure what that means. There's 219 books that deal somehow with vampires that are classified as science fiction and fantasy. 82 that are classified as romance. I mean, it goes on. Now, one of the things that I found is the book by Siri James. This is the writer who let us borrow her map and who we had a listener write in and say, oh my gosh, Siri James' book, Dracula, My Love, The Secret Journals of Mina Harker, great book. Well, now, with your free book from Audible, you could go and download this puppy and put it in your ear. I would probably wait until we're done with Dracula to start listening to it, but it would be nice to have it there so that when you start to go through Dracula withdrawals, you can immediately pick this puppy up and start listening. I have actually heard that Justine Eyre, who does the narration, that she did a lovely job on Dracula, My Love as well. And of course, Audible also has my personal favorite of vampire stories, Bite Me, a love story by Christopher Moore. That man cracks me up. Christopher Moore. He's a little edgy, perhaps a little PG-13 rated, sometimes quite definitely R-rated, but very, very funny. So when you have a chance, go over to audible.com and check out audiblepodcast.com/craftlit and get yourself a free book and help out the podcast as well. How cool is that? So that is all quite exciting for me and for the podcast in general, but not nearly as exciting as Dracula. A wee little bit of humor there, because today's chapter is sad. Very, very sad, and very, very exciting too. So when last we left our intrepid people, we had Seward reporting that Lucy had died, and Seward had said, "Ah, well, poor girl, there is peace for her at last. It is the end." And Van Helsing turned to him and said, with grave solemnity, "Not so, alas, not so. It is only the beginning." Oops. So, there are some things that happen in this chapter which may or may not make a whole lot of sense right away. It will make sense later. But there are also some things that, well, one of my favorite ever Van Helsing lines of dialogue occurs in this chapter. And in my mind's eye, when I see Anthony Hopkins say this, it makes me laugh. And I was thinking about that yesterday in the car while I was listening to it again. It still makes me laugh. But I was trying to put myself into the mind of a late 19th century reader who really didn't know anything much about vampire stories. And I think I probably would have been pretty horrified by his line. And no one in the text, that would be Seward, seems to respond to it exactly the way that I would anticipate someone back then to respond, or even me now to respond. And I find it very curious. And I'm absolutely confident that when that line flows through your ear, you're going to go, oh my gosh, that was it. And you're either going to have to rewind because you're laughing too hard, or you're just going to let it flow by you. Ooh, that was something I forgot to tell you. Last night, or the night before, on The Daily Show, Ralph Fiennes was on, and Jon Stewart was asking him about doing Shakespeare, and did he think it was just kind of in the DNA of British people that they just get Shakespeare and do it better than everyone else? And Ralph Fiennes said no. When he goes to see Shakespeare, it takes him 10 or 15 minutes to relax into the play and let the language become native to him. Even Ralph Fiennes, whose Coriolanus is coming out right now, he still has to give himself that time to adjust. So now you can't feel bad about going to see Shakespeare or listening to it and thinking, oh, I don't understand this language, it's so hard. No. Ralph Fiennes feels exactly the same way. Now, of course, he's probably studied all of the plays, and so he pretty much knows what's going on. But the exposition, you'll catch on. You will. You absolutely will. So I just wanted to let you know that we're in good company with Mr. Fiennes. He was very funny. Okay, but back to Dracula. So there's what to my modern ears sounds like a very funny moment coming up, what to someone's ears back then might have been truly horrifying. It's kind of hard to tell, because Stoker had a good sense of humor. He also clearly had a really good sense of how to create suspense and terror, but he did have a good sense of humor. He had to have had a good sense of humor because he worked for Irving for all those years in the theater, and I think he probably would have killed him had he not had a good sense of humor. Plus, when you work in the theater, it's really hard to do that unless you have a good sense of humor. Or perhaps drink a lot. I'm not sure which one is more important, but sense of humor always helps. Now, there are going to be at least one, and I think there might be more than one moment, where you're going to see that Dr. Seward is really not a particularly good judge of character, or he doesn't understand human motivation particularly well. And this time, it is such a clear error on his part. Whereas before, we've kind of been able to say, well, maybe he was schooled in a different method or didn't really understand madhouses, and look at the stuff he's doing to Renfield. This is really kind of a bad idea. We've been able to kind of write it off for a little while, but we've talked before about Seward, kind of some red flags going off. In this chapter, he really does completely misread someone, and it is a minor misreading of a girl, but I think it's significant because this is not the first time Stoker has put this in our path. And I find that fascinating because once you hear this one, tell me if I'm wrong, it's impossible to ignore anymore the fact that Seward, we've talked about unreliable narrators in other books. Seward might not just be unreliable, he may be downright blind to some things. And you're going to see he gets more pig-headed, or at least the blinders are on more strongly as we progress through the next few chapters. And part of me thinks that perhaps that was Stoker trying to play to a certain branch of his audience to try to make them feel like there is someone in the text who was just as disbelieving as they are, or who believed in the kindness of strangers just as much as they do. I'm not entirely sure what his motivation was, but I don't think we could ignore anymore that Seward may not be the most reliable narrator. However, we are given other narrators in this text because it is an epistolary novel. We are given other narrators who I think are more reliable, and that is a fascinating move on Stoker's part, and a rather dangerous one, in fact, because it could have really backfired. I'm going to clarify a couple of things on the flip side at the end of today's stories. But for those of you who were going back and forth about the bride, the bridegroom, and my discussing bodily fluids and all of that stuff, and marriage, and not talking originally about the bodily fluids and how Dracula is kind of perverting that whole paradigm. Today is the chapter where you will see why I was talking about bodily fluids in the very simple and curious symbology of straight up male-female marriage. It becomes clear. It's a comment from Arthur, and listen for it because it should make you smile and then probably laugh a little bit later, but you won't be alone. And I'll talk to you about that on the flip side. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to the capable hands of our vocalists today, starting with the marvelous Aaron Ziegler.
Dr. Seward's diary continued.
The funeral was arranged for the next succeeding day so that Lucy and her mother might be buried together. I attended to all the ghastly formalities, and the urbane undertaker proved that his staff was afflicted or blessed with something of his own obsequious suavity. Even the woman who performed the last office for the dead remarked to me in a confidential, brother-professional way when she had come out from the death chamber, "She makes a very beautiful corpse, sir. It's quite a privilege to attend on her. It's not too much to say that she will do credit to our establishment." I noticed that Van Helsing never kept far away. This was possible from the distorted state of things in the household. There were no relatives at hand, and as Arthur had to be back the next day to attend his father's funeral, we were unable to notify anyone who should have been bidden. Under the circumstances, Van Helsing and I took it upon ourselves to examine the papers, etc. He insisted upon looking over Lucy's papers himself. I asked him why, for I feared that he, being a foreigner, might not be quite aware of English legal requirements, and so might in ignorance make some unnecessary trouble. He answered me, I know. You forget that I am a lawyer as well as a doctor. But this is not altogether for the law. You knew that when you avoided the coroner. I have more than him to avoid. There may be papers more, such as this." As he spoke, he took from his pocketbook the memorandum which had been in Lucy's breast, and which she had torn in her sleep. "When you find anything of the solicitor who is for the late Mrs. Westenra, seal all her papers, and write him tonight. For me, I watch here in the room and in Miss Lucy's room all night, and I myself search for what may be. 'Tis not well that her very thoughts go into the hands of strangers." I went on with my part of the work, and in another half hour had found the name and address of Mrs. Westenra's solicitor, and had written to him. All the poor lady's papers were in order. Explicit directions regarding the placement of burial were given. I had hardly sealed the letter when, to my surprise, Van Helsing walked into the room, saying, "Can I help you, friend John? I am free, and if I may, my service is to you." "Have you got what you looked for?" I asked. To which he replied, "I did not look for any specific thing. I only hoped to find, and find I have, all there was. Only some letters and a few memoranda and a diary new begun. But I have them here, and we shall, for the present, say nothing of them. I shall see that poor lad tomorrow evening, and, with his sanction, I shall use some." When we had finished the work in hand, he said to me, "And now, friend John, I think we may to bed. We want sleep, both you and I, and rest to recuperate. Tomorrow we shall have much to do, but for the night there is no need of us, alas." Before turning in, we went to look at poor Lucy. The undertaker had certainly done his work well, for the room was turned into a small chapel ardente. There was a wilderness of beautiful white flowers, and death was made as little repulsive as might be. The end of the winding sheet was laid over the face. When the professor bent over and turned it gently back, we both started at the beauty before us, the tall wax candles showing a sufficient light to note it well. All Lucy's loveliness had come back to her in death, and the hours that had passed, instead of leaving traces of decay's effacing fingers, had but restored the beauty of life, till positively I could not believe my eyes that I was looking at a corpse. The professor looked sternly grave. He had not loved her as I had, and there was no need for tears in his eyes. He said to me, "Remain till I return," and left the room. He came back with a handful of wild garlic from the box waiting in the hall, but which had not been opened, and placed the flowers amongst the others on and around the bed. Then he took from his neck inside his collar a little gold crucifix and placed it over the mouth. He restored the sheet to its place, and we came away. I was undressing in my room when, with a premonitory tap on the door, he entered and at once began to speak. "Tomorrow I want you to bring me, before night, a set of post-mortem knives." "Must we make an autopsy?" I asked. "Yes and no. I want to operate, but not what you think. Let me tell you now, but not a word to another. I want to cut off her head and take out her heart." "Ah, you, a surgeon, and so shocked? You, whom I have seen with no trouble of hand or heart do operations of life and death that make the rest shudder. Oh, but I must not forget, my dear friend John, that you loved her, and I have not forgotten it, for it is I that shall operate, and you must not help. I would like to do it tonight, but for Arthur I must not. He will be free after his father's funeral tomorrow, and he will want to see her, to see it. Then, when she is coffined, ready for the next day, you and I shall come when all sleep. We shall unscrew the coffin lid, and shall do our operation, and then replace all, so that none know, save we alone." "But why do it at all? The girl is dead. Why mutilate her poor body without need? And if there is no necessity for a post-mortem and nothing to gain by it, no good to her, to us, to science, to human knowledge, why do it? Without such it is monstrous." For answer, he put his hand on my shoulder and said with infinite tenderness, "Friend John, I pity your poor bleeding heart, and I love you the more because it does so bleed. If I could, I would take on myself the burden that you do bear. But there are things that you know not, but that you shall know, and bless me for knowing, though they are not pleasant things. John, my child, you have been my friend now many years. And yet, did you ever know me to do anything without good cause? I may err, I am but man, but I believe in all I do. Was it not for these causes that you sent for me when the great trouble came? Yes. Were you not amazed, nay, horrified, when I would not let Arthur kiss his love, though she was dying, and snatched him away by all my strength? Yes. And yet you saw how she thanked me, with her so beautiful dying eyes, her voice, too, so weak, and she kiss my rough old hand and bless me. Yes. And did you not hear me swear promise to her, that so she closed her eyes, grateful, yes? Well, I have good reason now for all I want to do. You have for many years trust me. You have believed me weeks past, when there be things so strange that you might have well doubt. Believe me yet a little, friend John. You trust me not, then I must tell what I think, and that is not perhaps well. And if I work, as work I shall, no matter trust or no trust, without my friend trust in me, I work with heavy heart, and feel oh so lonely when I want all help and courage that may be. He paused a moment, and went on solemnly. Friend John, there are strange and terrible days before us. Let us not be two, but one, that so we work to a good end. Will you not have faith in me? I took his hand and promised him. I held my door open as he went away and watched him go into his room and close the door. As I stood without moving, I saw one of the maids passing silently along the passage. She had her back to me, so she did not see me, and go into the room where Lucy lay. The sight touched me. Devotion is so rare, and we are so grateful to those who show it unasked to those we love. Here was a poor girl putting aside the terrors which she naturally had of death, to go watch alone by the bier of the mistress whom she loved, so that the poor clay might not be lonely till laid to eternal rest. I must have slept long and soundly, for it was broad daylight when Van Helsing waked me by coming into my room. He came over to my bedside and said, You need not trouble about the knives. We shall not do it. Why not? I asked, for his solemnity of the night before had greatly impressed me. Because, he said sternly, it is too late, or too early. See, here he held up the little golden crucifix. This was stolen in the night. How stolen? I asked in wonder, since you have it now. Because I get it back from the worthless wretch who stole it, from the woman who robbed the dead and the living. Her punishment will surely come, but not through me. She knew not altogether what she did, and thus, unknowing, she only stole. Now we must wait. He went away on the word, leaving me with a new mystery to think on, a new puzzle to grapple with. The forenoon was a dreary time, but at noon the solicitor came, Mr. Marquand, of Holman, Sons, Marquand and Litterdale. He was very genial and very appreciative of what we had done, and took off our hands all cares as to details. During lunch, he told us that Mrs. Westenra had for some time expected sudden death from her heart, and had put her affairs in absolute order. He informed us that, with the exception of a certain entailed property of Lucy's father, which now, in default of direct issue, went to a distant branch of the family, the whole estate, real and personal, was left absolutely to Arthur Holmwood. When he had told us so much, he went on, Frankly, we did our best to prevent such a testamentary disposition, and pointed out certain contingencies that might leave her daughter either penniless or not so free as she should be to act regarding a matrimonial alliance. Indeed, we pressed the matter so far that we almost came into collision, for she asked us if we were or were not prepared to carry out her wishes. Of course, we had then no alternative but to accept. We were right in principle, and 99 times out of 100 we should have proved, by the logic of events, the accuracy of our judgment. Frankly, however, I must admit that in this case any other form of disposition would have rendered impossible the carrying out of her wishes. For by her predeceasing her daughter, the latter would have come into possession of the property, and even had she only survived her mother by 5 minutes, her property would, in case there were no will, and a will was a particularly impossibility in such a case, have been treated at her decease as under intestacy, in which case Lord Godalming, though so dear a friend, would have had no claim in the world, and the inheritors, being remote, would not be likely to abandon their just rights for sentimental reasons regarding an entire stranger. I assure you, my dear sirs, I am rejoiced at the result, perfectly rejoiced. He was a good fellow, but his rejoicing at the one little part in which he was officially interested of so great a tragedy was an object lesson in the limitations of sympathetic understanding. He did not remain long, but said he would look in later in the day and see Lord Godalming. His coming, however, had been a certain comfort to us, since it assured us that we should not have to dread hostile circumstances as to any of our acts. Arthur was expected at 5 o'clock, so a little before that time we visited the death chamber. It was so in very truth, for now both mother and daughter lay in it. The undertaker, true to his craft, had made the best display he could of his goods, and there was a mortuary air about the place that lowered our spirits at once. Van Helsing ordered the former arrangement to be adhered to, explaining that, as Lord Godalming was coming very soon, it would be less harrowing to his feelings to see all that was left of his fiancée quite alone. The undertaker seemed shocked at his own stupidity, and exerted himself to restore things to the condition in which we had left them the night before, so that when Arthur came, such shocks to his feelings as we could avoid were saved. Poor fellow. He looked desperately sad and broken. Even his stalwart manhood seemed to have shrunk somewhat under the strain of his much-tried emotions. He had, I knew, been very genuinely and devotedly attached to his father, and to lose him, and at such a time, was a bitter blow to him. With me he was warm as ever, and to Van Helsing he was sweetly courteous. But I could not help seeing that there was some constraint within him. The professor noticed it too, and motioned me to bring him upstairs. I did so, and left him at the door of the room, as I felt he would like to be quite alone with her. But he took my arm and led me in, saying huskily, "You loved her too, old fellow." She told me all about it, and there was no friend had a closer place in her heart than you. I don't know how to thank you for all you have done for her. I can't think yet. Here he suddenly broke down and threw his arms around my shoulders and laid his head on my breast, crying, "Oh, Jack, Jack, what shall I do? The whole of life seems gone from me all at once, and there is nothing in the wide world for me to live for." I comforted him as well as I could. In such cases, men do not need much expression. A grip of the hand, the tightening of an arm over the shoulder, a sob in unison, are expressions of sympathy dear to a man's heart. I stood still and silent till his sobs died away, and then I said softly to him, "Come and look at her." Together we moved over to the bed, and I lifted the lawn from her face. God, how beautiful she was! Every hour seemed to be enhancing her loveliness. It frightened and amazed me somewhat. And as for Arthur, he fell to trembling and finally was shaken with doubt as with an ague. At last, after a long pause, he said to me, in a faint whisper, "Jack, is she really dead?" I assured him sadly that it was so, and went on to suggest, for I felt that such a horrible doubt should not have life for a moment longer than I could help, that it often happened that after death faces become softened and even resolve into their youthful beauty, that this was especially so when death had been preceded by an acute or prolonged suffering. I seemed to quite do away with any doubt, and after kneeling beside the couch for a while and looking at her lovingly and long, he turned aside. I told him that that must be goodbye, as the coffin had to be prepared, so he went back and took her hand in his and kissed it, and bent over and kissed her forehead. He came away, fondly looking back over his shoulder at her as he came. I left him in the drawing-room, and told Van Helsing that he had said goodbye, so that the latter went to the kitchen to tell the undertaker's men to proceed with the preparations and to screw up the coffin. When he came out of the room again, I told him of Arthur's question, and he replied, "I am not surprised. Just now I doubted for a moment myself." We all dined together, and I could see that poor Art was trying to make the best of things. Van Helsing had been silent all dinner time, but when we had lit our cigars, he said, "Lord," but Arthur interrupted him. No, not that. For God's sake, not yet at any rate. Forgive me, sir. I do not mean to speak offensively. It is only because my loss is so recent." The professor answered very sweetly, "I only used that name because I was in doubt. I must not call you Mister, and I have grown to love you, yes, my dear boy, to love you as Arthur." Arthur held out his hand and took the old man's warmly. "Call me what you will," he said. "I hope I may always have the title of a friend, and let me say that I am at a loss for words to thank you for your goodness to my poor dear." He paused a moment and went on, "I know that she understood your goodness even better than I do, and if I was rude or in any way wanting, at that time you acted so. You remember." The professor nodded. "You must forgive me." He answered with a grave kindness, "I know it was hard for you to quite trust me then, for to trust such violence needs to understand, and I take it that you do not, that you cannot trust me now, for you do not yet understand. And there may be more times when I shall want you to trust when you cannot, and may not, and must not yet understand. But the time will come when your trust shall be whole and complete in me, and when you shall understand as though the sunlight himself shone through. Then you shall bless me from first to last for your own sake, and for the sake of others, and for her dear sake to whom I swore to protect. And indeed, sir, said Arthur warmly, I shall in all ways trust you. I know and believe you have a very noble heart, and you are Jack's friend, and you were hers. You shall do what you like. The professor cleared his throat a couple of times, as though about to speak, and finally said, May I ask you something now? Certainly. You know that Mrs. Westenra left you all her property. No, poor dear, I never thought of it. And as it is all yours, you have a right to deal with it as you will. I want you to give me permission to read all Miss Lucy's papers and letters. Believe me, it is no idle curiosity. I have a motive of which, be sure, she would have approved. I have them all here. I took them before we knew that all was yours, so that no strange hand might touch them, no strange eye look through words into her soul. I shall keep them if I may. Even you may not see them yet, but I shall keep them safe. No word shall be lost, and in the good time I shall give them back to you. It is a hard thing that I ask, but you will do it, will you not, for Lucy's sake? Arthur spoke out heartily, like his old self. Dr. Van Helsing, you may do what you will. I feel that in saying this I am doing what my dear one would have approved. I shall not trouble you with questions till the time comes. The old professor stood up as he said solemnly, And you are right. There will be pain for us all, but it will not be all pain, nor will this pain be the last. We, and you too, you most of all, dear boy, will have to pass through the bitter water before we reach the sweet. But we must be brave of heart and unselfish, and do our duty, and all will be well. I slept on a sofa in Arthur's room that night. Van Helsing did not go to bed at all. He went to and fro, as if patrolling the house, and was never out of sight of the room where Lucy lay in her coffin, strewn with the wild garlic flowers, which sent, through the odor of lily and rose, a heavy, overpowering smell into the night.
Mina Harker's Journal. 22 September. In the train to Exeter, Jonathan sleeping. It seems only yesterday that the last entry was made, and yet how much between then, in Whitby and all the world before me, Jonathan away and no news of him, and now, married to Jonathan, Jonathan a solicitor, a partner, rich, master of his business, Mr. Hawkins dead and buried, and Jonathan with another attack that may harm him. Some day he may ask me about it. Down it all goes. I am rusty in my shorthand. See what unexpected prosperity does for us. So it may be as well to freshen it up again with an exercise anyhow. The service was very simple and very solemn. There were only ourselves and the servants there, one or two old friends of his from Exeter, his London agent, and a gentleman representing Sir John Paxton, the president of the Incorporated Law Society. Jonathan and I stood hand in hand, and we felt that our best and dearest friend was gone from us. We came back to town quietly, taking a bus to Hyde Park Corner. Jonathan thought it would interest me to go to the Row for a while, so we sat down. But there were very few people there, and it was sad-looking and desolate to see so many empty chairs. It made us think of the empty chair at home. So we got up and walked down Piccadilly. Jonathan was holding me by the arm, the way he used to in the old days before I went to school. I felt it very improper, for you can't go on for some years teaching etiquette and decorum to other girls without the pedantry of it biting into yourself a bit. But it was Jonathan, and he was my husband, and we didn't know anybody who saw us, and we didn't care if they did. So on we walked. I was looking at a very beautiful girl, in a big cartwheel hat, sitting in a Victoria outside Giuliano's, when I felt Jonathan clutch my arm so tight that he hurt me, and he said under his breath, "My God!" I am always anxious about Jonathan, for I fear that some nervous fit may upset him again, so I turned to him quickly and asked him what it was that disturbed him. He was very pale, and his eyes seemed bulging out, as half in terror and half in amazement he gazed at a tall thin man with a beaky nose and black moustache and pointed beard, who was also observing the pretty girl. He was looking at her so hard that he did not see either of us, and so I had a good view of him. His face was not a good face. It was hard, and cruel, and sensual, and big white teeth that looked all the whiter because his lips were so red, were pointed like an animal's. Jonathan kept staring at him, till I was afraid he would notice. I feared he might take it ill, he looked so fierce and nasty. I asked Jonathan why he was disturbed, and he answered, evidently thinking that I knew as much about it as he did, "Do you see who it is?" "No, dear," I said, "I don't know him. Who is it?" His answer seemed to shock and thrill me, for it was said as if he did not know that it was me, Mina, to whom he was speaking. "It is the man himself." The poor dear was evidently terrified at something, very greatly terrified. I do believe that if he had not had me to lean on and to support him, he would have sunk down. He kept staring. A man came out of the shop with a small parcel and gave it to the lady, who then drove off. The dark man kept his eyes fixed on her, and when the carriage moved up Piccadilly, he followed in the same direction, and hailed a hansom. Jonathan kept looking after him, and said, as if to himself, "I believe it is the Count, but he has grown young. My God, if this be so! Oh, my God, if I only knew, if only I knew!" He was distressing himself so much that I feared to keep his mind on the subject by asking him many questions, so I remained silent. I drew away quietly, and he, holding my arm, came easily. We walked a little further, and then went in and sat for a while in the Green Park. It was a hot day for autumn, and there was a comfortable seat in a shady place. After a few minutes staring at nothing, Jonathan's eyes closed, and he went quickly into a sleep with his head on my shoulder. I thought it was the best thing for him, so did not disturb him. In about 20 minutes he woke up and said to me quite cheerfully, "Why, Mina, have you been asleep? Oh, do forgive me for being so rude. Come, and we'll have a cup of tea somewhere." He had evidently forgotten all about the dark stranger, as in his illness he had forgotten all that this episode had reminded him of. I don't like this lapsing into forgetfulness. It may make or continue some injury to the brain. I must not ask him, for fear I shall do more harm than good, but I must somehow learn the facts of his journey abroad. The time has come, I fear, when I must open the parcel and know what is written. Oh, Jonathan, you will, I know, forgive me if I do wrong, but it is for your own dear sake. Later. A sad homecoming in every way, the house empty of the dear soul who was so good to us, Jonathan still pale and dizzy under a slight relapse of his malady, and now a telegram from Van Helsing, whoever he may be. You will be grieved to hear that Mrs. Westenra died 5 days ago, and that Lucy died the day before yesterday. They were both buried today. Oh, what a wealth of sorrow in a few words! Poor Mrs. Westenra! Poor Lucy! Gone! Gone, never to return to us! And poor, poor Arthur, to have lost such a sweetness out of his life! God help us to bear all our troubles.
Dr. Seward's diary continued, 22 September.
It is all over. Arthur has gone back to Ring and has taken Quincy Morris with him. What a fine fellow is Quincy. I believe in my heart of hearts that he suffered as much about Lucy's death as any of us, but he bore himself through it like a moral Viking. If America can go on breeding men like that, she will be a power in the world indeed. Van Helsing is lying down, having a rest preparatory to his journey. He goes to Amsterdam tonight, but says he returns tomorrow night, that he only wants to make some arrangements which can only be made personally. He is to stop with me then if he can. He says he has work to do in London which may take him some time. Poor old fellow. I fear that the strain of the past week has broken down even his iron strength. All the time of the burial he was, I could see, putting some terrible restraint on himself. When it was all over, we were standing beside Arthur, who, poor fellow, was speaking of his part in the operation, where his blood had been transfused to Lucy's veins. I could see Van Helsing's face grow white and purple by turns. Arthur was saying that he felt since then as if they two had been really married, and that she was his wife in the sight of God. None of us said a word of the other operations, and none of us ever shall. Arthur and Quincy went away together to the station, and Van Helsing and I came on here. The moment we were alone in the carriage, he gave way to a regular fit of hysterics. He has denied to me since that it was hysterics, and insisted that it was only his sense of humor asserting itself under very terrible conditions. He laughed till he cried, and I had to draw down the blinds lest anyone should see us and misjudge. And then he cried till he laughed again, and laughed and cried together just as a woman does. I tried to be stern with him, as one is to a woman under the circumstances, but it had no effect. Men and women are so different in manifestations of nervous strength or weakness. Then, when his face grew grave and stern again, I asked him why his mirth and why at such a time. His reply was, in a way, characteristic of him, for it was logical and forceful and mysterious. He said, "Ah, you do not understand, friend John. Do not think that I am not sad though I laugh. See, I have cried even when the laugh did choke me. But no more think that I am all sorry when I cry, for the laugh he come just the same. Keep it always with you, that the laughter who knock at your door and say, 'May I come in?' is not true laughter. No, he is a king, and he come when and how he like. He ask no person, he choose no time of suitability. He say, 'I am here.' Behold, in example, I grieve my heart out for that so sweet young girl. I give my blood for her, though I am old and worn. I give my time, my skill, my sleep. I let my other sufferers want that she may have all. And yet I can laugh at her very grave, laugh when the clay from the spade of the sexton drop upon her coffin, and say, thud, thud, to my heart, till it send back the blood from my cheek. My heart bleed for that poor boy, that dear boy, so of the age of mine own boy, had I been so blessed that he live, and with his hair and eyes the same. There, you know now why I love him so. And yet when he say things that touch my husband heart to the quick, and make my father heart yearn to him as to no other man, not even you, friend John, for we are more level in experiences than father and son. Yet even at such a moment, King laugh, he come to me and shout and bellow in mine ear, 'Here I am, here I am,' till the blood come dance back and bring some of the sunshine that he carry with him to my cheek. Oh, friend John, it is a strange world, a sad world, a world full of miseries and woes and troubles. And yet when King Laugh come, he make them all dance to the tune he play. Bleeding hearts and dry bones of the churchyard and the tears that burn as they fall all dance together to the music that he make with that smileless mouth of him. And believe me, friend John, that he is good to come and kind. Ah, we men and women are like ropes drawn tight with strain that pull us different ways. Then tears come, and like the rain on the ropes, they brace us up until perhaps the strain become too great and we break. But King Laugh, he come like the sunshine, and he ease off the strain again, and we bear to go on with our labor, what it may be. I did not like to wound him by pretending not to see his idea, but as I did not yet understand the cause of his laughter, I asked him. As he answered me, his face grew stern, and he said in a quite different tone, "Oh, it was the grim irony of it all. This so lovely lady garlanded with flowers, that looked so fair as life, till one by one we wondered if she were truly dead. She laid in that so fine marble house, in that lonely churchyard where rest so many of her kin, laid there with the mother who loved her, and whom she loved, and that sacred bell going toll, 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 so sad and slow, and those holy men with the white garments of the angel pretending to read books, and yet all the time their eyes never on the page, and all of us with the bowed head, and all for what? She is dead, so, is it not? Well, for the life of me, Professor, I said, I can't see anything to laugh at in all that. Why, your expression makes it a harder puzzle than before. But even if the burial service was comic, what about poor Art and his troubles? Why, his heart was simply breaking. Just so. Said he not that the transfusion of his blood to her veins made her truly his bride? Yes, and it was a sweet and comforting idea for him. Quite so. But there was a difficulty, friend John. If so that, then what about the others? Ho ho, then this so sweet maid is a palanderist, and me, with my poor wife dead to me, but alive by church's law, though no wits, all gone, even I, who am faithful husband to this now no wife, am bigamist. I don't see where the joke comes in there either, I said, and I did not feel particularly pleased with him for saying such things. He laid his hand on my arm and said, Friend John, forgive me if I pain. I showed not my feeling to others when it would wound, but only to you, my old friend whom I can trust. If you could have looked into my heart then when I want to laugh, if you could have done so when the laugh arrived, if you could do so now, when King Laugh have packed up his crown and all that is to him, for he go far, far away from me, and for a long, long time, maybe you would perhaps pity me the most of all. I was touched by the tenderness of his tone, and asked why. Because I know. And now we are all scattered, and for many a long day loneliness will sit over our roofs with brooding wings. Lucy lies in the tomb of her kin, a lordly death house in a lonely churchyard, away from teeming London where the air is fresh and the sun rises over Hampstead Hill, and where wildflowers grow of their own accord. So I can finish this diary, and God only knows if I shall ever begin another. If I do, or if I ever open this again, it will be to deal with different people and different themes. For here at the end, where the romance of my life is told, ere I go back to take up the thread of my life work, I say sadly and without hope, Fini.
The Westminster Gazette, 25 September, a Hampstead mystery. The neighbourhood of Hampstead is just at present exercised with a series of events which seem to run on lines parallel to those of what was known to the writers of headlines as the Kensington Horror, or the Stabbing Woman, or the Woman in Black. During the past 2 or 3 days, several cases have occurred of young children straying from home or neglecting to return from their playing on the heath. In all these cases, the children were too young to give any properly intelligible account of themselves, but the consensus of their excuses is that they had been with a blue-fur lady. It has always been late in the evening when they have been missed, and on 2 occasions the children have not been found until early in the following morning. It is generally supposed in the neighbourhood that as the first child missed gave his reason for being away that a blue-fur lady had asked him to come for a walk, the others had picked up the phrase and used it as occasion served. This is the more natural as the favourite game of the little ones at present is luring each other away by wiles. A correspondent writes us that to see some of the tiny tots pretending to be the blue-fur lady is supremely funny. Some of our characterists might, he says, take a lesson in the irony of grotesque by comparing the reality and the picture. It is only in accordance with general principles of human nature that the blue-fur lady should be the popular role at these alfresco performances. Our correspondent naively says that even Ellen Terry could not be so winningly attractive as some of these grubby-faced little children pretend, and even imagine themselves to be. There is, however, a possibly serious side to the question, for some of the children, indeed all who have been missed at night, have been slightly torn or wounded in the throat. The wound seems such as might be made by a rat or a small dog, and although of not much importance individually, would tend to show that whatever animal inflicts them has a system or method of its own. The police of the division have been instructed to keep a sharp lookout for straying children, especially when very young, in and around Hampstead Heath, and for any stray dog which may be about. The Westminster Gazette, 25th September, extra special. The Hampstead Horror. Another child injured. The Bloofer Lady. We have just received intelligence that another child, missed last night, was only discovered late in the morning under a furze bush at the Shooter's Hill side of Hampstead Heath, which is perhaps less frequented than the other parts. It has the same tiny wound in the throat as has been noticed in other cases. It was terribly weak and looked quite emaciated. It too, when partially restored, had the common story to tell of being lured away by the Bloofer Lady.
Well, that was a lot of information and new things happening, no? Let's go back to a moment to two rather amazing revelations by Van Helsing. One, when he was talking to Seward, he said that Arthur looks like his son, but his son is not living anymore. So that's very sad and kind of interesting. But the other thing that was interesting about that is that he said his wife is still alive, but has no wits anymore, so that she's dead to him, but alive according to the church, but that she's lost her mind, which kind of is, an interesting Jane Eyre connection, the Mad Woman in the Attic kind of thing. But it also, you kind of start to wonder, well, his wife's lost her mind and his son is dead, and how safe is it being around this guy? He has a great sense of humor, and he started laughing, of course, when Arthur made this statement that because he had given a transfusion to Lucy, he considered them already married. Which is funny because all the guys in the room had given blood to Lucy, and of course that's what sets poor Van Helsing a-laughing. I also found the modern, I don't know if it was back then too, but the double entendre of Seward's comment on Arthur Holmwood's shrunken manhood to be amusing. But the humor of that situation is one of the few moments in the book where you actually get legitimate humor. Seward communicates quite a bit of Van Helsing's attitude and personality, and he is definitely, in a few moments, the comic relief, kind of the gravedigger in Hamlet, as it were. And this is one of them. But those revelations about his personal life are impressive and very sad. And it is one possible explanation for why this crazy old man can become so attached to the young people who he's trying to help. He knows what it is to lose a child. He knows what it is to have lost a spouse. And so he has perhaps a deeper level of empathy, certainly than Seward does at this point, but a deeper level of empathy than another doctor might have had in a situation like this. Now, some of you are probably fairly reeling in your mind about what Mrs. Westenra did with the estate in giving it to Arthur Holmwood, now Lord Godalming, because his father is dead, and so the title has passed on to him. And what I've read is that, yes, this is ridiculous and not impossible, not unheard of. The solicitor would very definitely have fought her on it. The solicitor, however, would not have been divulging that information to a bunch of strangers, no matter who they were and how they were related to the family. But it would have been more likely to put the estate into Lucy's name with the caveat that upon her marriage to Arthur Holmwood, it would have gone to Holmwood. But short of that, this is pretty amazing that she would have set it up this way, especially because they were only engaged in May and now it's September. So, yes, that's odd. At the same time, Stoker had to do something to make it okay, or even remotely plausible, that they are about to embark on what they are going to have to embark on without getting into trouble with the authorities. So, it's not really realistic, but hey, it's a vampire story, so let's just roll with it. And of course, Arthur's reaction to the news that he has a new estate, I think is just, Bram Stoker really had to focus on creating a certain number of characters and let the rest of them kind of go. And Holmwood is, as the male ingenue, one of the least completely built characters, and I think it's fine to kind of let that go. Moving into Mina's journal from September 22nd. Now, this is quite something. I mean, they've gone to the funeral, and that's all very sad. And yes, there is some question raised in the literary criticism as to whether Bram Stoker wanted us to realize that Dracula perhaps did kill off the lawyer, leaving Harker and his wife without any kind of adult supervision, or even a sane ear to talk to. They're really very isolated now, and they're also in a larger estate than they would have been in had they been on their own. Now, when they were at Hyde Park, Mina said they took an omnibus to Hyde Park Corner. The omnibus at that time was horse-drawn, and it was probably a double-layered, large wagon carriage. And a Victoria, the beautiful girl that she saw in the hat, sitting in a Victoria outside of Giuliano's. A Victoria would have been one of the open carriages, kind of like you see, the royal family, not the Sleeping Beauty carriage, not the Cinderella carriage with the glass and the roof and everything, but the open one that they're able to wave at everyone from. That's a Victoria. And Giuliano's was a jewelry store in Piccadilly. And so she's sitting outside a jewelry store waiting for a package, and Dracula's watching her. And then he takes off after her. And it's not Dracula as we've seen him before. I mean, he still has a mustache. And Mina's description of him is not very pleasant, which may just mean that she's a better judge of character than Jonathan was, because Jonathan didn't really talk about how feral and animal Dracula looked at the time. Or maybe it's just that he's looking feral and animal because he's watching a woman. And since he's just lost his diet, his Lucy diet is now gone. He's off his diet. He has to find someone else until he can, find the next girl to drain forever. Now, Mina realizes at least part of what's going on, and she knows that she is going to have to read Jonathan's journal and, within weeks of their marriage, break one of her vows to him. But I think we can all accept that it's probably a good idea for her to get that reading done and out of the way pretty soon, because Jonathan's not doing so well, and in fact completely forgot having even seen Dracula when he woke up from this brain fever nap of his. So, poor Jonathan. Not looking so good for him right now. Seward then picks up the narrative again. Quincy Morris is still hanging around, helping Arthur out. Van Helsing goes off and comes back for some reason. We don't know what it is yet. And then we get to the Westminster Gazette. The Bloofer Lady. There's a blog out there called The Bloofer Lady, I think, that I came across while I was doing research. The Bloofer Lady, probably called Bloofer as a phonetic spelling of how a small child might mess up the word beautiful. If you've ever heard kids, reversing syllables and stuff like that, it's possible to get that out of beautiful. But Lucy is, of course, gorgeous, and even more gorgeous-er in death. And so we are left to wonder, golly, is it Lucy? Or is it the other pretty girl in the cartwheel hat? Or is it one of the gorgeous, voluptuous women from Transylvania? Has he brought them with him? We don't know at this point. What we do know is there's a beautiful lady. It's nighttime. And children are showing up with their throats torn a little bit, like a small dog or a rat would do. So whereas Dracula's puncture wounds in Lucy's neck were very clean, little tiny puncture wounds, whoever's doing the drinking now doesn't really know what they're doing yet. And they're tearing the necks, which is creepy and horrifying, and it's supposed to be. Now, there were some famous child murders that actually did take place in and around Hampstead Heath. The undergrowth was pretty thick, and it was very easy to hide there. So that would have been known. I think it was 1879 when the big ones occurred, and so that would have rung bells in people's minds. That would have kind of creeped them out, probably. And yes, the way let me go back and look at it. The way that the Westminster Gazette referred to the headlines, the Kensington Horror, the Stabbing Woman, or the Woman in Black, yes, that is very likely Bram Stoker tipping his hand and waving a big hello at Wilkie Collins for the Woman in White, because that book was still quite popular. And there were also, and this goes along with the Daniel Radcliffe movie that's coming up soon, women in black have appeared in local legends for centuries, I'm reading to you now, often said to be the ghosts of widows or murdered men or murder victims themselves seeking revenge. So there's a long-standing kind of urban legend thing going on about the women in black, but there's no reason not to also think that Stoker was waving at Wilkie Collins, which I think is kind of cool. So, creepy. The book is now tying itself into real things, real children's murders and things like that, which are just appalling. And Lucy's gone, and Jonathan is not okay. And that is where we are going to have to leave it for this week. Now, as for upcoming podcasts, as we head into the Christmas holidays, I am going to do my best to pre-record some episodes and get them to post automatically while I am gone, because I am going to be back in Tucson with family and friends for a couple of weeks. However, that does mean that I won't have access or easy access to being able to fix or adjust or alter or rectify any problems. So if I can get them to load properly, then they will. And if I can't, then we'll just all have to wait. And I will be very frustrated and unhappy myself. But that also means that those episodes will be pretty much book only. I won't have any announcements or anything like that, because what would be the point, really, of even trying? So with that, I'm going to sign off for today. Please don't forget to visit audiblepodcast.com/craftlit. And also, you can download the free app for Stitcher Radio by visiting stitcher.com/craftlit, or you can follow the links that you find in the show notes sidebar. And let the people know, once you download the application for Stitcher, you're going to see a little bar across the top that says, "Where did you hear about Stitcher?" Click on that, type in CraftLit, and then they know that you are one of my peeps. And they will treat us all very nicely because of that. Stitcher Radio is working for CraftLit. I'm still working on getting just the books up there, but it's not there yet. So, have a great week. I hope your weather is getting wintry and festive, and I hope your days are full of lights and your nights full of fun. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Please remember to support the people who support CraftLit. Visit Knit Circus online magazine, offering 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can check out the latest issue at www.knitcircus.com. And what would Madame Defarge knit? A new book of knit and crochet patterns coming to you from the CraftLit family. And please visit the blogs and sites of CraftLit supporters. Those links can be found in the sidebar of the show notes. The show notes can be found at craftlit.com. CraftLit can also be accessed by its own Android and iPhone application. You can purchase it at the iPhone or iTouch application store, or you can subscribe free at iTunes. CraftLit is made possible by the generous support of its listeners, and for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.